In this lesson, we'll create a drawing of an octopus using watercolor and pen and ink applications. We'll begin on a sheet of hot pressed watercolor paper, which has enough tooth to accept watercolor applications, but smooth enough to create nice controlled lines. We'll start with an H graphite pencil and we'll begin sketching out the contours of our subject. We'll start with loose marks here, and we're also putting light pressure on the pencil. We want to make sure that we won't create any grooves in the surface of the paper which could mar subsequent applications with the watercolor and the pen and ink. It's okay to deviate a little bit from the photo reference in these early stages. We're just concentrating on laying out a strong composition and capturing the subject as accurately as possible. As we're drawing the initial contours, we want to pay close attention to the relationships between the positive and negative shapes that happen within each tentacle and around the head and the body of the octopus. Making comparisons between the shapes that you see on your reference and the shapes in your drawing will help to ensure that you have a level of accuracy in your preliminary drawing. I'll also draw a couple of light lines along the tentacles to get a good idea of where the suckers are going to be located. Most of the details of the drawing will be developed using our pen and ink applications. With our preliminary graphite drawing in place, we can begin to consider our pen and ink applications. And in this case, I'll be using some technical drawing pens by Stettler. These pens come in a variety of widths. For this drawing, we'll be using a 0.1 millimeter pen. We'll go ahead and start in an area of importance. In this case, we'll start in the area around the eye. We'll leave an area of highlight and fill in the rest of the eye using small squiggly marks. We can then define part of the contour and begin the process of developing the value and the texture. We'll take each section at a time for this drawing. We'll start by adding some darker tones around the eye using lines that are placed close together. We'll also begin the process of creating the impression of texture by using small squiggly lines. We'll define a few of the contours for one of the tentacles, and then we'll go back and define some of the shapes for the suckers. We'll go back to the head for now and start to develop some of the values a little bit further. We'll make the values around the eye a bit darker, while at the same time creating the impression of texture by making small circular strokes. Since we're working with a pen here, we're working primarily with line. This means we're using line to communicate not only the texture, but also the value. It's very simple to do this, although sometimes time-consuming. We need to place these marks closer together to create darker values in areas of shading, and further apart to create lighter values in midtones. We'll also need to consider the directional strokes that are made with a pen in order to create the illusion of texture. Of course, the texture of the subject that you're drawing will dictate the directional strokes that you make. And of course, this will be different for each subject that you encounter. In this case, I find that the small circular strokes mimic the texture that we see on the octopus. We'll also consider the light source, of course, and in this drawing, the light source is originating from above. This means that most of the darker values will exist on the underside of the tentacles. This means that we'll concentrate the textural marks that we make in these areas to make the values a bit darker. We'll continue this process a section at a time, working our way from the right to the left. Again, defining the contours, and in some cases defining the locations of the suckers, before going back and filling in the areas of darker value with textural marks. We'll also need to consider the line quality in the drawing, and line quality refers to the thickness or thinness of a line. By varying the line quality, we not only create variety in the drawing, but we also add additional interest. At the same time, we can create the impression of form and the light source. If we make the line thicker in certain areas, we can create the impression of a shadow. In most circumstances, we'll concentrate on increasing the line quality by making the line thicker around the outer edge or outer contour of the body of the octopus. Now we've moved on to our third tentacle, and here again the process is the same. We'll start by defining the contours, and in this case define some of the suckers, before moving on to adding the impression of value and the illusion of texture with small squiggly marks. Then, once we have the texture and value defined, we can go back and enhance the line quality. In this case, I'm enhancing the line quality on the underside of this tentacle, making the lines a bit thicker around the outer edge. We'll keep the same process as we move on to different tentacles on the body of the octopus. Again, defining the contour, then defining the suckers, and creating the impression and illusion of value and texture. It's important to work slowly, but work slightly loosely. Don't allow yourself to get obsessed with the fact that you're making permanent marks with the ink pen. If you allow this thought to dictate the marks that you may find that the marks you make are a bit stiff, and that will lead to a drawing that looks stiff as well. So it's okay to loosen up a bit, especially when we're making these textural marks. As we slowly and patiently develop the value and texture, we'll consider the fact that it's always easier to make an area darker if need be, especially with pen and ink applications. As we progressively darken the values, if you find yourself to be a bit timid, it's okay to make the values a little bit lighter than you think they may need to be. You can always go back at a later stage in the drawing and make the values darker by just simply applying additional applications of the ink. And as we go, we'll continually make adjustments to the line quality. Here, I'm thickening up the line around the tentacle that extends towards the viewer. By making the lines thicker on the objects that extend toward the viewer, we also create the impression of space. We'll see a more clearly defined line on objects that are closer to the viewer. We'll thicken up the line on the tentacle that's a bit further away from the viewer, but only on the bottom side, to create the impression of shadow. Then we'll continue work on our next tentacle. Now, of course, there's different ways to approach a drawing like this. I find that by working in sections, especially with a pen and ink drawing, I can ensure consistency by making comparisons to the other sections that I've already completed. This will help to ensure a sense of harmony and unity in the drawing. Like with most painting and drawing media, it's important to be patient. Allow the drawing to slowly develop. Be patient with your applications as you build up the illusion of value and texture. There's no reason to rush this process. Now we can move on to our final tentacle, and at this point we have quite a bit of information as far as the value goes. If we need to, we can always go back and push the value range further. We can make some of the values darker in areas or perhaps enhance some of the midtones. We want to ensure that we have a full range of value and tone in the drawing. After all, we see the world around us as a collection of values, and in most cases we see the darkest darks and the lightest lights and the midtones in between. We can also begin the process of developing the values and textures on the head. Here we have some patterns, distinct patterns that are visible, so the texture is slightly different, but the way that we develop the values is going to be the same. We'll simply continue to concentrate the marks in the area where the value is the darkest. Once we've developed the texture in this area, we can go back and enhance the line quality as well, again making the line a bit thicker on the bottom side of the head. Now our pen and ink drawing is complete and we're ready to start applying washes of watercolor. We're only going to use a few colors for this wash, focusing mainly on oranges and purples. We'll start with a light mixture of purple, mostly a red purple, using a combination of alizarin crimson and a touch of ultramarine blue. We'll start with light washes initially, but we can progressively build up the intensity of the color by adding additional washes over the top. Of course, our pen and ink drawing will do a lot of the work for us as far as defining the values. Since we define the values and a lot of the texture with our initial drawing, we can concentrate on the relationships of color and the applications of color at this point in the process. Now we'll switch over to a bit of orange, and this orange is made by mixing a bit of cadmium red with a touch of cadmium yellow. We'll allow these orange applications to overlap some of the red-purple applications already in place. This will create quite a bit of depth in the color and additional interest. Just as we did with the purple applications, we can progressively build up the intensity of the color with subsequent applications over the top. Here again, there's no need to rush this process. We have complete control over the intensity and values of the colors that we create. We can just simply layer them gradually. Using our purple and orange mixtures, we can start applying a few colors to the head as well. We'll try to make brush strokes flow in the direction that makes sense for each part of the form of the octopus. In this case, you can see the brush strokes applied to the head are flowing around the form of the head. This will help further the illusion of form and further the illusion of texture as well. Now we're going to add a bit of Prussian blue to some of the shadowed areas. This blue will help make some of the shadows feel a bit cooler, and it will also contrast the orange, since orange and blue are complementary colors. We can also use this Prussian blue to darken up some of the values and create the illusion of shadow, even in the areas of core shadow, along and underneath each tentacle. Even a subtle application on the body of the octopus helps to define the form further and create a few more areas of slightly darker value. It also can help us to accentuate some of the patterns that happen on the head of the octopus. We're not mixing these colors with any other colors to make the value darker. In other words, I'm not using the Prussian blue with burnt umber to make a more natural looking black or gray. Instead, we're relying mainly on the pen and ink applications to affect the overall value. However, placing the Prussian blue in some areas will give the impression that the value is slightly darker. It also, of course, makes the color cooler, which will help us to interpret these areas as shadows. Then we can go back with our oranges and purples and intensify the color a bit in areas. These pops of color, of course, add additional variety and interest to the painting. They also help to increase the contrast between the cooler tones that we already have in place. We can also do the same with some of the purples and some of the blues as well. And now our drawing, created with pen and ink and watercolor wash of an octopus, is complete. If you're ready to learn more about drawing and painting, then check out our comprehensive membership program, which includes video courses, weekly live lessons, ebooks, lesson plans for teachers, and much, much more. To learn more about our program, just click on the card in the upper right-hand corner or visit thevirtualinstructor.com/members today. And if you'd like to check out 3 of our course modules for free, you can do so by joining our mailing list. Just click on the link you see here on your screen. You'll get access to 3 of our course modules, which includes videos and ebooks, and of course you'll get updates when new lessons are posted on the website. And if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching.